So now all the drawing's done, and all the flats and everything, and all the character interactions are working, and we're happy with the timings and all that kind of stuff is done. We've done the main bulk of the work. So now it was time for me to refine the cinematography, to refine the lighting, and to make use and take advantage of the new features in Blender 2.83, like lights being able to affect the grease pencil objects, like colored lights being able to affect the grease pencil objects, and the new blur features that are improved over the previous version as well. So like motion blur and things like that. Let's switch EVEE on. Alright, so let's take a look at how the scene looks now that it's been kind of lit up a little bit more, right? So we've got all these kind of like, over in the background here, these are the ones that are casting, you know, the big lights off and from underneath the arches and everything. Remember that we set up a, if I go into the shading mode, we can see that we've got our volumetric scatter. So I showed you how to set that up earlier. Okay, so then what we've got is a bunch of other lights in the scene now to actually, you know, kind of highlight places that I need highlighting as well, right? Because it's not enough just to have those lights over there. I need stuff to be in the foreground. So if you come over here, if we come back here, each of these is a blue light, because I wanted this like blue light in the foreground kind of thing, and orange light off in the background, because I like those things as complementary colors. And I also wanted them to affect the grease pencil layers, right? So when the character comes past the lights, it's going to light that character up. Right, so let's take a look at how that stuff works, how the lighting affects the grease pencil, because this is, for my money, this is the coolest new feature in 2.83 for grease pencil. Now, saying that, I haven't tried the Vertex colors yet, and they look pretty cool, right? But for me, this whole 3D lights of being able to affect the 2D grease pencils is huge, right? Because it allows you to tie it all in, right? It allows you to tie all that lighting and coloration in to your grease pencils without having to go in and individually, like, you know, manipulate colors to the nth degree to get everything blended beautifully in that, right? It really just shortcuts a lot of that stuff, and especially when you're doing storyboards and animatics, you know, we don't want to be spending tons of time doing stuff like that, right? But it would be nice to get this level of cohesiveness to the image. So I'll just focus on this area down here. You can see it go in and out of lights down here, right? So you can see the way that his body is kind of being brightly lit and then dimly lit, and then even when we move over here, that he actually gets cast in the orange kind of hues as we move over here. Now that's all happening because of those different colored lights and the fact that he's moving past all of those different colored lights. Let me show you what this is like without that feature on, and then let's break it down a little bit. If I click the character, so I've selected him there, I just haven't got the little thing on. In order to enable this, the first thing you need to check, they are on by default, I think, but just check. So over here on the grease pencil, we're on the grease pencil object, right? So you got all these settings over here. Click your object thing and click on use lights. Now if I switch that off, you'll see what he actually looks like. He's just a gray texture. If you go to materials, you'll see he's just gray, right? He's just a gray material. I think he's got a bit of a tint on him, which is taking him up a little bit. But generally, he's just a gray dude. I've got a rim light on him. I'll talk about that in a minute, right? Just ignore that for the time being. You click this, you click that on, and that's now being affected by the proximity of lights. Now you also notice here that the rim light disappears. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute as well, but basically that means that the rim lights only show up when there's a light source near the object, or at least that's my understanding of it. Right. So you click that on, and now we've got, let me move on a bit so we can kind of see the, you know, a nicely lit bit, right? So here it is. So we got that light on, and then you go to the grease pencil actual layers, and you can actually set this on and off for every individual layer. So if I go to the fill layer and I click lights off, it won't affect any of the fill. And then if I was to do the same on the line layers, or if I had various shade layers on there, you can manipulate that as much as you want, which is pretty cool. So here he is being affected by all of that. Let's get outside the camera. I'll demonstrate what moving the light does by way of demonstrating the effects that it has on the grease pencil. Right? So this is the light here. It's a blue light, as you can see here. So if I change that light, you'll see that it changes the effect on the character and the other character over there actually as well. Let's make it green. If I drag this down, you'll see the closer it gets to it, yeah, the brighter that effect is on the grease pencil layer. Further away, the dimmer. You know, if I'm up here, it's like highlighting the top. If I'm down here, so you could really get some dramatic kind of effects going on if you wanted them, right? So that's that. Now, one thing to really watch out for, because it took me a while to realize what was happening, is that if the object is behind the grease pencil object, so if it's behind the object, it will not light the front up, right? Because there is no three-dimensionality to the object, so you're not going to get any like subtle, like you would on a 3D object. Even if it was being lit from behind, it would cast some light over the 3D surface. So you have to make sure that wherever you position these lights, if you want them to affect the grease pencil object, it has to be like on this side of the camera, right? So all of these lights that I set up here were kind of off camera. They're like sort of behind the camera, like as if we were in a studio and somebody was, you know, holding up lights. But they were all kind of purposely put there to make sure that they were always hitting the grease pencil object from the direction I wanted them to, in order to get the effect that I wanted. So if I just run him through here now from there, right? So out, see he's left the kind of proximity of that light now, and over he goes. There's barely any light on. There's no light on him really here anymore. But you still can you see the green light is still affecting this area now, and it's affecting this character. It's affecting this character too. This is what I love about it, because look how nicely tied in this is, right? You could just play with the color mixing and everything just with the lighting. So now we go down here, there's a blue light there. So that's, now he's in the blue. And then once we get over here, this is an orange light, so you'll see him turn orange as well as he goes over there. Alright, so that's how that works. Those are the things to watch out for, the proximity and then the relation to front or back on the object. And just once more, as a reminder, just make sure that in your little object setting that use lights is on, and then in your grease pencil that whatever layers you want to be affected by the light have the use lights on. By the way, all of these effects settings, as far as I'm aware, only work when you're using EVEE, so the rendered view, the real-time EVEE rendered view. Another nice way you can use lights is to kind of, because you can animate lights, you can animate the brightness, the dimness, the brightness, the color, when it comes off and on, where it moves. So I used it as a muzzle flash, right? So if we play this through here, now I've got a drawn muzzle flash in the grease pencil layer there, but as you can see, there's this kind of light emanating from it as it's happening. So how did that happen? Well, if I switch this on, you can see there's actually a light there. So you can see then down here on the dope sheet, you can see that there are keyframes for that lighting, and it basically, it's following along here, and I just keyframed it to be in the right place where I wanted. It goes, where's the thing there, right? Boom, and then it goes off. So it's basically just keyframed at the point where the muzzle flash happens, and then here again in a moment you see, boom, off it goes. It's just very subtle, but it does, when you watch it play out, it does help, right? All these little subtle little additions help stack together to accumulatively add value to these things. Because the grease pen, because the light affects the grease pencils, we can do stuff like this too. So it's not all about just like the scene lights and everything. It's actually effects. We can combine it with 2D effects. Okay, so the next layer of detail and sort of finish I put on these things was rim lighting. Okay, so if we go through the scene, you'll see that it comes up here. There's no rim lighting there, and then we get up to here, which is kind of the lit. Like I want it to feel backlit a little bit here. We've got some rim lighting going on in the characters there. And as we slide down here, we've got rim lighting. You'll see this enemy's got quite pronounced rim lighting on the back of it. As we come around here and he goes into light again, rim light, rim light, rim light. And yeah, so I think that really kind of gives it that nice layer. It gives it a little bit of three-dimensionality to it, ties it in with the two main light sources. So you've got the foreground lights are casting the blue for the main body, and then this distant backlight is kind of hitting him kind of from behind to the left, to the right, whichever direction we are at any time. So bear in mind, I have a rim light effect going on him. You do that the same way you do anything else with the effects, right? You come to the effects panel here, which is a little magic wand. You drop down menu, go to rim, and then you choose the color of your rim light. Or, you know, for the sake of this, I'll change the color. So he's got a red rim light on him there. You choose the offset. Basically, what it does is it makes a mask of whatever fill you've got, and then you can shift the mask however you want it. Now you can actually key this as well, which I'll show you in a minute. So if you want the direction to change or the extremity of the rim light to change, you can actually animate that. You can keyframe practically every setting on anything in Blender. It's amazing, and this is how I do the motion blur. So that's that rim light. Now bear in mind what I said before is that the rim lights only seem to work, maybe it's all effects, I don't know, but the rim lights only seem to show up when it's in proximity of a light. Right, so once we go down to this dip here, you see the rim light drops off here. I haven't switched the rim light off here. This is just acting in accordance to the other lights around it. Right, so then we back up into the light in there, and now, you know, the lighting, the rim lighting is back. So talking about the keyframes here, I mean, it's very subtle what I did, the changes I did with him. But what you do is the same with anything, right? Once you've got these parameters up here, you just hold your mouse or your cursor over it, and you press I on it to create the keyframe, and it'll go orange because it's keyframed, and then you can see it down here on your little dope sheet timeline thing. You'll see the keyframe show up, and then as you can see, these are the ones here, right? This bracket here. So when we go across, it's very subtle. I'm only moving it kind of incrementally. You can't really see this. You'll see this much more pronounced on the blur feature. But I have subtly changed the angle of the rim light there. I tell you what, just for the sake of demonstration, let me do something more extreme. Right, it's here on this, right, and then I'll make a keyframe here, which is way off on the other side, perhaps like that. And I'll make a keyframe on that, and then now you can see that the rim light switches sides. I learned very quickly when I came to doing cinematic storyboards, right, it's the power of depth of field, right? When you're doing stuff that you want to be really cinematic and you want to have strong cinematography and stuff like that, and you want it to feel like you're looking through a camera, depth of field is a huge factor in that, right? You look at any film, whenever you're looking through a camera, you will usually have a strong depth of field. Again, this is another advantage of working in 3D, is the depth of field is kind of, you choose your depth of field and it's all kind of done for you. Whereas when you're storyboarding in 2D, you have to manually, you know, blur the layers, the degree that you want it to be blurred at. But it's a very cool and very quick and effective thing to do, is to put things really out of focus in the foreground, or put the background slightly out of focus, that then it instantly then feels like a camera, and it directs your eye to where you want it to be on the focused objects. And your work will instantly feel more cinematic if you use depth of field more often. Now we come to my second favorite new addition to Blender 2.83, which is the improved blur features, or at least they seem massively improved to me over what I can remember playing within 2.8. Okay, so now as we play through this, you'll see that various little bits of this have motion blur and on various types of blur. Okay, so we got some sort of depth of field kind of blur going on here. We've got a bit of motion blur there for that moment, and you can see it's animated, so it's not the same consistency all the way through, and then the motion blur stops. We've got motion blur with this character coming into shot, and then clear, and then back into a depth of field blur, and then we've got this character coming out of a depth of field blur into a motion blur, back into a motion blur there. I don't think I actually put any blur on the main character, weirdly. Looking at it now, that's a bit of a missed opportunity, but never mind. When this character comes in here, massively out of focus, but motion blurred. Then when the bounding beast comes through here, he's coming from depth of field, in, leaping, cut, and then we use some motion blur on the blood and the enemy as he flies through shot. The guys over here to the right in the distance are all in depth of field blur. This character goes out of focus, blah 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 blah, right? Just lots of blurry shit going on here. Let's break down a couple of those, right? So let's tackle depth of field first, because there's a couple of them that have just got this depth of field setting on them, which is really cool. So the first thing you need to understand about depth of field is that this is to do with your camera, right? So you need to, in your camera settings, you need to make sure the depth of field is actually on for start. okay? And then, so if I switch that off, you can see, do you see the back, where the background is now all, like it's not depth of fielding anymore. It's still got that impression because we've got the volumetric shading in, but actually if you look, the background is clear and now it's blurred because it got depth of field on. Now I've got the focus on the actual 3D man who the main character is parented to. So all the way through this scene, the focus is always going to be on the plane that that object is on, which happens to be the same plane that the grease pencil man is on. So what you've got then is what's called f-stop here, right? So this is like the sort of the extremity of the depth of field, or the sort of distance the depth of field is from that point, right? So if I drop that right down, then almost everything is just blurred apart from that one axis that the that one point that the object is on. If I put it right the way up, you can't even see the blur. So I'll put it down to a point where you can still see it, but here we go, right? That's that. Now if I switch this focus on object off, right? Now that's how I did it, right? You do that and then you click on the object you want to focus on, okay? But if you don't want to do that, you can actually just set the actual meters away from the camera that you want to be in focus. So can you see the way that the depth of field is changing as I'm pulling it up and down? Yeah. So then if I do the depth of field again, think here, I can choose how extreme that like difference is. It's like kind of like f-stop, I think of like as turning the volume up on the depth of field, right? So the focus distance is where you're focusing on, and the f-stop is like cranking the volume up on how extreme you want that difference in the depth of field to be. So I'll jump to the last two enemies in this, because those two have got the actual, this great new feature in the blur settings called use as depth of field, right? Which gives you a nice shortcut to a depth of field effect with characters that are within the 3D space, okay? The others are all kind of keyframe blurred, so I'll go through that in a moment as well. So these two characters up here, sorry, it's this one and this one. Again, over here now in my modifiers, I put blur on them. Now, when that comes up normally, it'll just come up as like 50-50, which is really extreme. I don't actually know why the default is that high. It should be like 2 or something. But anyway, so that's what that would look like. And if I wanted to manually change that, then I could change that. But there's also this fantastic new addition, which I'm pretty sure wasn't there before, is if you just click use as depth of field, that will conform to your established depth of field within your camera. So if I roll through this now, you can see that way off, as we're only approaching it, it's out of focus, that second one, and that third one off, the final one way off in the distance especially. This one then comes into focus as you see the character now is on the same kind of position, so the depth of field is kind of equal between them. And then once our character jumps away, then that character is out of focus again because he's outside of the f-stop kind of parameters. And then again with that one, you see the way the one in the background now, the furthest one, is out of focus, but as our character reaches up to him, he comes into focus. And again, that's because this one has also got used as depth of field. It's an amazing feature. I don't actually know how they worked that out, but it's terrific and I absolutely love it. That's one way to really quickly get this nice sense of depth of field within the scene. I've said depth of field a lot during this period. So the other method is the actual keyframing of the blur direction, right? And this is how you can achieve either like an equal kind of Gaussian type blur, or an actual directional blur that you can keyframe and animate and everything, right? So let's take this creature as the case study for this, right? So we can see down here that there's a whole bunch of keyframes there, right? So as we go through it, we're going from, if you look, we've got quite an extreme figures over here for a nice I'll switch this off. Quite high figures here because it's massively out of focus there, right? And as it comes in, that I've toned that down a bit, still out of focus. As it jumps there, it's doing a motion blur. So the X here, can you see that? The X is higher, much higher than the Y. So that's then how you distinguish between like a kind of left to right or diagonal kind of motion blur, as opposed to just a normal kind of blur, right? You just, down here, it gives you the X and Y, and you can change those independently. So as it comes, boosh, and then he's in clarity there for the key moment, and then back out of focus there. So So then let's move on to, as it comes back in here now, it's quite extreme. So we can see now that now I've got the X is 21 and the Y is 2. So if I change, let's see if I drop that down there now, it kind of goes away, right? And if I put the X, the Y all the way up, it'll feel like it's going upwards. So that's how you change the direction. Because you can keyframe this, you could say someone did a massive sword swipe or something like that, and you really wanted that change of like the arc of the motion blur. You could totally animate that by just changing these. So now we're done with him, and then the main stuff here now was this guy, right? So we've got a couple of things going on here. So we've got our main dude. He's slashing. There's no motion blur on the dude, right? So let's take a look at this creature over here. This one. So he's out of focus coming towards us. Into focus here because I really wanted him to read at that moment, right? I want him to read here, get slashed, and then as he comes towards camera, you see that the motion blur again is, is pushed in one direction, so it gives that sense of momentum. So that's that, and then the final little like icing on the cake here was this layer, which is a new layer I added, and I think I parented it to the enemy grease pencil, and this is the blood effect. And again, that's actually got two filters on it. So it's got a motion blur filter. It's got the blur filter, sorry, and I've done a motion blur on it by going more extreme on the X axis. The other feature I've got on here then is the wave distortion. So actually, if I switch both of these off, this is what the actual artwork looks like for that blood. They were just kind of like it was like a fill material that I just did silhouettes with. So it looks crap like that, right? But then when you switch the blur on, it looks pretty decent. And then just for a little bit of extra sauce, I put this wave distortion on. I'll switch the blur off in a minute so you can see the effect this wave distortion has. This is really useful for things as well. You just play about with this stuff. These things are here to have fun and to experiment with, right? So you can change the amplitude of this. It does like a wavy kind of thing to it, this sort of thing. So you can play with that and have some fun with that if you want. Another ridiculously obsessive little detail that I put in because I couldn't help myself is I gave him glowing eyes. Let's see if I can, why can't I select that? There they are. They're so tiny. Come on, there we go. So these are a separate grease pencil layer that's actually parented to the other stuff. It's just 3 dots, and I went through and I did them, dot, 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 dot. And then I gave it a glow color. So how to do this again, go to your effects tab, drop it down, go to glow, there, and then play with the settings, and that's how you make a little nice little glow. The last slightly obsessive little detail I put in just to finish it all off was this flash on the blade. It's a very subtle little thing, but I found that without it, it didn't quite read as clearly as, because there's quite a lot going on here, right? So you just kind of want to draw it out a little bit and just kind of let it read, add in a little something to help it read. So this this line here is just a layer, the grease pencil there. So if I switch it off, you can see, if you watch this through, I mean, it's okay, it's fine, but just that little bit of extra effort there helps it read. That's all the kind of like the post-processing stuff done. What I absolutely love here as well in EVEE, with Blender and EVEE, is that this is all live, right? So this is, I've called this kind of post because it's polish and it's refinement and it's putting little bells and whistles on, but it's all still completely live in the scene. Right now, the video that I released and I put on the beginning of this, and I'll play again in a minute, the final thing, I rendered, but it's still rendered from EVEE, right? So the only difference is that you see all this like nasty, like you come down here, you see the light is kind of like strobing a bit and kind of glitching out now and again. You see it's not, when I'm scrubbing through it and it's kind of like a bit janky in places. When you render this out via EVEE, so if you go to render and then render animation, right, all of that would be lovely and clean when it comes out. It'd be really pristine. But I just love the fact that you can get to this level of kind of finish without doing any post-processing at all. Not even compositing within Blender, because you can composite within Blender and you could probably shine this stuff up really nice. I haven't looked into the compositing stuff because it's all, it's all the nodes and all that kind of stuff, and I'm just not ready for that yet. It's the lights for me, see, that do this. The lights just tie this all together in a way that if they weren't there, it would still look like, here's a flat dude on top of a clearly not flat and atmospherically lit background. But with the lights, it just ties it all together, and the rim lighting effect helps, I think, as well. Yeah, so I think that's it for the main process. Question here from Dave DeKaiser. So he's asking about the difference between the interpolation modes. One question I have is it easier to keep some of the poses static, or does the drawing layer have to move with the camera? There's a nice hop at the start where the drawing is held in place, but I wonder for the run cycle at the end if the drawings could be held in place before it switches to the next key drawing. So what Dave is talking about here, or asking about, is what I briefly touched on in the previous tutorial, is the difference between constant and linear interpolation between keyframes. So to answer David's query about my use of stepped/constant interpolation versus linear interpolation on this, let me run through that again, right? So here, it's almost everything on this is on linear interpolation, which is the sort of default like auto keying, sliding along type objects. Yeah. But once we get to here, I step this stuff so that it jumps in time. And then when we get down here, so I think if this bit works really effectively as linear because he's sliding. So I think things like sliding and flying, like my wingsuit scene, that all works really well linear. But it's when you get down to contact to the ground, I think that it feels like you will really want to step it. Like this bit here, which was the bit that David called out in his comment specifically, was that he felt that this bit probably feels a little bit slidey and it could use being constant interpolation on that character. And I agree. And actually this is a bit that kind of bothered me a lot when I did it. I kind of needed to move on from it, So let's take a look at how that's done again. Again, this was very briefly touched on in the main tutorial, but let's see if I can break it down a little bit more here. So these frames here now, right? So these frames are like that one, that one, that one. Okay, so the challenge doing this, right? This is why this is a bit of a pain in the bum workaround. Is the grease pencil keyframes are not the same thing as the object keyframes, and it's the object that's animated in that fashion, not the grease pencil, right? So you have to, if you go to dope sheet and then grease pencil, right? I can see where my keyframes are there. So you can see my keys are there, there, there. All right. So let's go back again to the timeline. Playback. All right. So what you have to do is you have to create new keys on your object that match where your drawings switch over. Okay, it's not difficult to do, it's just a bit of a pain in the bum. And unfortunately, because this is one of the drawbacks of using 3D objects again. So because my grease pencil is parented to the 3D object, and it's the 3D object that is actually keyed as linear in 3D space right now, in order to get the stepped effect, I have to add keyframes to the 3D object. So you see how this is like an extra step on top of an extra step on top of an extra step here that really is not worth the effort, I think, if you really want this kind of stepped effect, right? So anyway, let me click him. Right, so I've got the dude selected there now, right? I got my man selected. Alright, so we can see the keys down the bottom here. No, so basically what I have to do is just, you click along, right? So you click along, and what I'm doing is I'm watching for when the grease pencil keyframes change. Alright, so now I'm going to add a new keyframe on my 3D man. Keep going. There, new keyframe. New keyframe. Now, if I was doing this and I hadn't used the 3D man, all I would have had to do is to make the keyframes on the actual grease pencil object instead of finding the 3D man, switching him on, keyframing on him. I don't have to do any of that. So it's a couple of steps more because I'm using the 3D man. And I think there's one more there. And this. Now, where are those keyframes? Right, so we start at there. And the end. So we want everything up to here from there, right? Because the ones where he's in mid-air are fine, right? So if I select these object transformations now, right-click, interpolation mode constant, so he steps along. But another downside again of this thing is because the camera is moving smoothly in full speed, stepping the character like this is kind of delaying and then getting caught up to, and you really have to do this very deliberately if you're going to do it. And you would have to add more in-betweens. If I had more in-betweens and more keys here, it wouldn't be such an issue. But I think generally the step thing when you're moving quickly with the camera can be problematic, and I think the best solution to that is actually to step the entire scene in increments of say 10 or 20 frames, just so that everything is kind of moving at once instead of it feeling like the camera is going faster than the characters. I think this is one of the challenges with working with this particular type of like animating the object approach in Blender, is that to get around the slidey feet thing, there's definitely a little bit of work that's got to be done to get around that. I think I'll be exploring that in detail moving forward for sure, to try and find an absolute optimized way of doing it.